name is Paul Douglas, and I'm your host for Critical Thinking for Mormons. I'd like to welcome you to episode number 2. If you recall from episode 1, we introduced what critical thinking is and also why it's important. In this episode, we're going to focus more on the argument, as well as syllogisms, premises, and conclusions. The material that we're going to cover in this segment is not altogether easy to comprehend and demands much more than the kind of automatic or fast thinking that we talked about in episode 1. But a solid understanding of formal logic is extremely important before we get into logical fallacies, that is, informal logic.
I'd like to have an argument, please.
Certainly, sir. Have you been here before?
No, this is my first time.
I see. Try Mr. Barnard, room 12.
Thank you.
Come
Is this the right room for an argument?
I've told you once.
No, you haven't.
Yes, I have.
When?
Just now.
No, you didn't.
Yes, I did.
Didn't.
I did.
Didn't.
I'm telling you I did.
You did not.
Oh, I'm sorry, is this a 5-minute argument or the full half hour?
Oh, just the 5-minute one.
Fine. Thank you. Anyway, I did.
You most certainly did not.
Now, let's get one thing quite clear. I most definitely told you.
You did not.
Yes, I did.
You did not.
Yes, I did.
Didn't.
Yes, I did.
Didn't.
Yes, I did.
No, this isn't an argument.
Yes, it is.
No, it isn't. It's just contradiction.
No, it isn't.
Yes, it is.
It is not.
It is. You just contradicted me.
No, I didn't.
Oh, you did.
No.
You did just then.
No, nonsense.
Oh, look, this is futile.
No, it isn't.
I came here for a good argument.
No, you didn't. You came here for an argument.
Well, an argument's not the same as contradiction.
Can be.
No, it can't. An argument's a connected series of statements to establish a definite proposition.
No, it isn't.
Yes, it is. It isn't just contradiction.
Look, if I argue with you, I must take up a contrary position.
But it isn't just saying no, it isn't.
Yes, it is.
No, it isn't. Argument's an intellectual process. Contradiction is just the automatic gainsaying of anything the other person says.
No, it isn't.
Yes, it is.
Not at all.
No, look.
Thank you. Morning.
What is an argument? Well, Michael Palin had it right. It isn't just contradiction. An argument is a connected series of statements intended to establish a proposition. No, it isn't. Yes, it is. The argument is fundamental to critical thinking. The first thing to recognize about the argument, as we use it in logic, however, is that it has nothing whatever to do with emotional confrontation. Like when someone says, I just had a terrible argument with my wife. In logic, an argument is a technical term that does not connote conflict or confrontation. In logic and critical thinking, the argument is defined as a series of statements, one being the conclusion and the others being the premises or the assumptions leading to that conclusion. The Greek philosopher Aristotle, 384 to 322 BCE, gave the world the idea of the argument, or as he referred to it, the categorical syllogism, which broadly is characterized as arguments with two premises supporting the conclusion, each premise sharing a common term with the conclusion, and the premises sharing a common term, the middle term, with each other. It was Aristotle who famously gave the example, all men are immortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. Aristotle called the object that we're talking about the subject of the sentence, men in this instance. What we say about the subject, are mortal, Aristotle called the predicate. A syllogism is a three-part logical argument based on deductive reasoning, in which two premises are combined to arrive at a conclusion. So long as the premises of the syllogism are true, and the syllogism is correctly structured, the conclusion will be true. Syllogisms can be represented using the following three-line structure, in which A, B, and C stand for the different terms. An example of a syllogism is, all mammals are animals, all elephants are mammals, therefore all elephants are animals. In a syllogism, the more general premise is called the major premise, all mammals are animals, and the more specific premise is called the minor premise, all elephants are mammals. The conclusion joins the logic of the two premises, therefore all elephants are animals. As we see again in the same example, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. If an argument of three statements is built where the subject of the first statement, men, is the predicate of the second statement, man, then the truth of the conclusion is guaranteed by the truth of the premises. Aristotle noted that the truth of some subject-predicate sentences has an effect on the truth of other subject-predicate sentences. This led him to construct what he called the square of oppositions. As you can see in the graphic, sentences 1 and 2, as well as 3 and 4, cannot both be true. The diagonal statements 1 and 4, as well as 2 and 3, are known contradictories, and one of them has to be true, but never both. The truth of one guarantees that the other, however, is false. 1 and 3, as well as 2 and 4, can both be true. If 1 is true, then 3 must be true. But 3 being true does not mean that 1 must be true. Using the square of oppositions, Aristotle noticed a mysterious fact. Take a sentence like Socrates is a man. If an argument of 3 statements is built where the subject of the first statement is the predicate of the second, then the truth of the third statement, called the conclusion, is guaranteed by the truth of the premises. Aristotle was all about deductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning works from the more general to the more specific. The other species is inductive reasoning, which works the other way, moving from specific observations to broader generalizations and theories. It's inductive reasoning that characterizes the scientific method. There are 3 common argument forms typically associated with deductive reasoning: the categorical syllogism, the disjunctive syllogism, and the hypothetical syllogism. Categorical syllogisms make claims about groups of things or categories. They use statements that refer to the quantity of members of a category, all, some, none, and denote membership or lack thereof of members of one category in another category. For example, premise 1, all cats are mammals. Premise 2, all mammals are animals. Conclusion, therefore all cats are animals. Or premise 1, all insects frighten me. Premise 2, that's an insect. Conclusion, therefore I'm frightened. The second form is the disjunctive syllogism. This type of syllogism has a disjunction as a premise, that is, an either-or statement. For example, premise 1, either my pet is a dog or my pet is a cat. Premise 2, my pet is not a cat. Conclusion, therefore my pet is a dog. And the third type of syllogism is the hypothetical syllogism. Hypothetical statements have 2 components. The if portion is referred to as the antecedent. It's the precipitating factor. The then portion is called the consequence. It is the resulting condition. For example, premise 1, if Jesus Christ arose from the dead, then he's the Son of God. Premise 2, Jesus Christ arose from the dead. Conclusion, therefore he is the Son of God. The categorical syllogism developed by Aristotle is probably not as useful as the hypothetical syllogism that was developed a century after Aristotle by the Stoic philosopher Chrysippus. If the witness is telling the truth, the defendant is guilty. The witness is telling the truth, therefore the defendant is guilty. Here's another example. If you have appendicitis, you'll have pains in your abdomen. You do not have pains in your abdomen, therefore you do not have appendicitis. A hypothetical syllogism is probably the most powerful reasoning tool for recognizing what may be true by identifying what's not true. It's the basis of the scientific method. It can take 2 forms, both beginning with an identical premise, with the keywords if and then. If A is true, then B must be true. This is called the premise. And of course, the premise must be correct or you'll not get reliable results. One form of the syllogism continues, A is true, therefore B is true. The other form continues, B is not true, therefore A is not true. Like many logical concepts, these also have Latin names. The first form, where A is true, is called modus ponens, meaning roughly the method of setting up, because it establishes that something is true. The second form, where B is false, is called modus tollens, meaning roughly the method of taking away, because it establishes that something is false. And as we'd mentioned already, the 2 parts of the premise also have names. The if part is called the antecedent, that is, the part that precedes or comes before. The then part is called the consequence, meaning that which follows as a consequence of the condition being true. We use the hypothetical syllogism dozens of times every day, likely without even knowing it. However, like any powerful tool such as fire or electricity or atomic energy, it can easily be abused. For each correct use of the hypothetical syllogism, there's a fallacious use that looks very much the same. This is especially insidious because they look like the genuine article. When I think of this, I think of St. Paul's comments about how Satan can appear as an angel of light. Modus ponens is a very useful form of reasoning, and in its set form, if A then B, A, therefore B, is always valid and correct. However, people often engage in a fallacious form of reasoning known as affirming the consequence, in which they presume that the converse, of a true conditional statement, or if-then statement, is said to be true. In other words, if A then B is true, then if B then A is true as well. This is the invalid version of modus ponens. And as I've said before, these types of fallacious arguments look very much like the genuine article, but as critical thinkers, will not be fooled. Here's an example. If I have the flu, then I'll have a fever. I have a fever, therefore I have the flu. This is obviously invalid. Many illnesses give rise to a fever, so the fact that I have a fever doesn't necessarily mean that I've got the flu. As you can see in the valid modus ponens argument, we have A, therefore B, whereas in the invalid, affirming the consequence, we have B, therefore A. The affirming the consequence argument is formally incorrect. That is, the conclusion simply does not follow from the premises. In the conditional, if A then B, B is the necessary condition for A, but A is only a sufficient, not a necessary condition for B. The antecedent doesn't have to be true just because the consequence is true. An example. Premise 1. If God exists, then the universe would be finely tuned for the existence of life. Premise 2. The universe appears to be finely tuned for the existence of life. Conclusion. Therefore, God exists. The conclusion in this example is fallacious, since the condition, God existing, is nowhere asserted to be the sole cause of the consequence, the universe being finely tuned for the existence of life. As worded, the argument's conditional doesn't prohibit the consequence from potentially arising from other causes. Perhaps the values by which the universe operates only appear infinitely variable, but for some unknown reason are what they are for non-God reasons. Or maybe our universe is just one of an infinite number of universes in an infinite multiverse and only appear fine-tuned to us because we're alive to notice it. Affirming the consequence, then, is a formal logical fallacy, which has the logical form, if A then B, B therefore A. Another example is, if taxes are lowered, I'll have more money to spend. I have more money to spend, therefore taxes have been lowered. How about this one? If you're a stupid person, you do stupid things. You do stupid things, therefore you're a stupid person. Well, I do stupid things all the time, just ask my wife. But I don't think of myself as a stupid person. Here's one that you've no doubt come across in the church. If God reveals himself in the Book of Mormon, he will preserve a record of his revelation. God has preserved a record of his revelation. Therefore, God has revealed himself in the Book of Mormon. The second premise affirms the consequence of the first premise. And the conclusion, then, is the antecedent of the first premise, which means that the argument commits the fallacy of affirming the consequence. Have you ever heard these ones being expressed or implied? If you obey the commandments and attend your meetings, you'll be happy. You have not done so, therefore you're unhappy. Or, if the church is true, I'll feel joy in obeying the commandments. I am joyful, therefore the church is true. Or, if I ask God to tell me the Book of Mormon is true, he'll cause a burning in my bosom. I did get a burning in my bosom, therefore the book is true. Here's a common one in Mormonism that I find particularly insidious. The true church will grow until it covers the whole earth. The church is growing, therefore the church is true. Is this argument valid? Well, let's do a detailed critical analysis of this one. How about the first premise? The true church will grow until it covers the whole earth. Well, remember our two rules of critical thinking. Don't take things at face value, and don't let emotion sidetrack reason. Who says the true church will grow until it covers the whole earth? Well, D&C 5864 says, "For verily the sound must go forth from this place unto all the world, and under the utmost parts of the earth. The gospel must be preached unto every creature, with signs following them that believe." And also in D&C 65:2, it tells us, "The keys of the kingdom of God are committed unto man on earth. And from hence shall the gospel roll forth unto the ends of the earth, as the stone which is cut out of the mountain without hand shall roll forth, until it has filled the whole earth." And D&C 133:37 reads, "And this gospel shall be preached unto every nation and kindred and tongue and people." Well, who wrote these things in the D&C? What was the source? Well, Joseph Smith, of course. Any problem with this? We're going to talk about the fallacy of begging the question shortly. It's a form of circular reasoning. This is the type of reasoning in which the proposition is supported by the premises, which is supported by the proposition, creating a circle. The logical form is X is true because Y. Y is true because X. The Bible is true. Why do you believe that? Because the Bible tells me so. Circular reasoning begins with what you want to end with. This is bad logic, because it doesn't allow you to come to any other conclusion than the one you started out with, even when that conclusion is false. Investigator, how do you know the Book of Mormon is true? Mormon, you need to pray about it. Investigator, where is that command taught? Mormon, in Moroni 10:4. Investigator, where is that found? Mormon, in the Book of Mormon. Investigator, how do you know the Book of Mormon is true? Mormon, you need to pray about it. Investigator, where's that command taught? And so on and so on. Let's examine premise 2, the church is growing. For as long as I can remember, the LDS Church has been perpetuating the myth that it's experiencing extraordinary worldwide growth, the inference being that it therefore is the one true church. The church's apostles take pride in projecting the public image that it's one of the fastest growing religions in the world, and an unwitting and lazy media repeat this mantra, which is blatantly and demonstrably untrue. The Mormon Church is not now, nor has it ever been, the fastest growing church in America, let alone the fastest growing religion in the world. An example of this deceptive imposition can be found on the church's official newsroom website in an article entitled Church Growth. It reads in part, the consequences of this rapid and sustained growth are seen in many places in the world where the church operates. Congregations that are grouped into geographical areas known as wards are periodically divided as they become too large to administer or to worship in a chapel or meeting house all at once. New buildings are being completed virtually every day of the year in order to house this growing membership. According to the National Council of Churches, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is the second largest growing church in the United States. This article is misleading and factually incorrect in so many ways. It leads an unknowing public to believe that the Mormon Church is not just growing, but experiencing extraordinary growth. This is simply not true. The growth of the Mormon Church is all but over. The growth rate in 2020 was 0.6%. That's just over 0.5% growth, the lowest annual percentage rate, incidentally, since 1857, according to the church's own numbers. The LDS Church is likely in decline. It's an absolute free fall in Europe. Indeed, if it were not for the current missionary successes in West Africa and a few parts of South America, even this paltry growth rate of 0.6% wouldn't be achieved. Yet the LDS Church still perpetuates the myth that the church is experiencing an extraordinary growth because it serves its purposes. Nevertheless, it's becoming more and more difficult to keep up the facade. While the church publishes membership numbers of about 16 million, Cumorah.com reports that less than half of those the church counts even identify themselves as Mormon. Assuming that the number of active members is lower than those who would even want to be identified as Mormon, hardly a heroic assumption. The actual functional membership of the LDS Church, even ignoring record resignations, is more realistically to be between 3 and 5 million men, women, and children, and it's a revolving door. While the church does not release the number of members resigning from the church for obvious reasons, it's likely that that number approaches the number of new converts every year. As well, for everyone hiring a lawyer or a notary to officially withdraw from the LDS Church as the church now demands, there are many more members who just walk away, increasing the already enormous inactivity ranks. In Britain, the activity rates currently sit at about 15%. The LDS Church also counts memberships differently than other churches. In most Christian churches, unlike the Mormon Church, there's a democratic ideal, and members are being asked to deliberate and vote on various matters. Consequently, these churches don't want to waste their time and resources reaching out to those who have no longer any interest in their organizations. In Mormonism, however, once someone joins the church, even if they attend one meeting never to return, they're counted on the church's membership rolls for the rest of their life, and in many cases far, far beyond. The church assumes for tabulation purposes that if they don't receive notice of a member's passing, they'll continue counting them until they would have been 110 years of age. But back to the church's newsroom posting. Let's look at each of the lies and attempts to deceive it contains. Lie number 1. The consequences of this rapid and sustained growth are seen in many places in the world where the church operates. The church itself reported a growth of 1.47% in 2017, 1.2% in 2018, 1.5% in 2019, and 0.6% in 2020. In what universe can we consider this rapid and sustained growth? Deceptive statement number 1. Congregations that are grouped into geographical areas known as wards are periodically divided as they become too large to administer or to worship in a chapel or meeting house all at once. New buildings are being completed virtually every day of the year to house this growing membership. Well, virtually every day is not every day, and this statement is deceptive, as it sounds like the meeting houses are bursting at the seams because of all the new members flooding in. Deceptive statement number 2. The article goes on to state that according to the National Council of Churches, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is the second fastest growing church in the United States. The article they're referring to was written over a decade ago by Melissa Wade, entitled "What are the fastest growing churches in the United States?" and is based on numbers that were collected in 2008. Not surprisingly, the Church's Post does not quote the National Council of Churches article directly, which goes on to state, Jehovah's Witnesses and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, regarded by many Christians as cults, reported the largest membership increases in a year, according to the National Council of Churches' 2008 Yearbook of American and Canadian Churches. Not only is this very old data, the actual functional membership in the church is less than 5 million people, with non-actives at more than double that number. Kimball's research also shows that active membership in the church is projected to be virtually the same in 2060, with non-active membership then being 4 times active membership. I personally think Kimball's projection for 2060 is likely optimistic, as his calculus was done prior to the most recent missteps and negative press the church has received, vis-a-vis its reversal of the ill-conceived exclusionary LGBTF revelation and the sexually invasive youth worthiness interviews, as well as the disclosure of the church's $100 billion slush fund. Cumorah.com reports also that 75% of foreign LDS converts are not attending the church within a year of their conversion. In the United States, 50% of converts fail to attend after a year. It's also a real challenge to get honest membership statistics from the church itself. There are myriad examples of how inflated and inaccurate their counts are. In Iceland, for example, where every registered religion receives a tax rebate for every member over age 16, the government reports there are 162 registered Mormons in 2019, while the church itself reports 288 members, 178% inflation. In Mexico, the church overstates its membership by 76%. In Chile, it's even worse, 80%. And in Canada, it's 41%. Even if we compare Mormonism to Christian denominations, the LDS Church's current dismal growth rate of 0.6% stacks up poorly against that of many other churches. The fact is that the growth rate of the Mormon Church is essentially the same as the Catholic Church and most Protestant churches in America, despite the latter not employing a huge proselyting missionary force. In 1967, for example, the Church of God in Christ had 425,000 members. In 2012, the membership was 5,499,000. In 2073, the Presbyterian Church in America had just 41,232 members. In 2013, the membership was 365,000 members. And in 2065, the Assemblies of God had 572,000 members. In 2013, the membership was 3,030,000 members, an increase of 430%, with a growth rate of just 0.6%, with convert baptisms flagging and a declining membership activity rate, 25% for young single adults. Obviously, interest in the Mormon Church is clearly diminishing. Yet we got Mormon President Russell Nelson and Mormon apostles Jeffrey Holland and Quentin Cook making statements like these.
Thankfully, even a pandemic has not been able to slow the onward march.
We're in the midst of incredible growth, staggering growth in the church. It's the single biggest problem we have. It's the best problem we could have, but it's the biggest. We are reeling under the implications of the growth that we have in this church.
Some have asserted that more members are leaving the church today and that there is more doubt and unbelief than in the past. This is simply not true. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has never been stronger. The number of members removing their names from the records of the church has always been very small and is significantly less in recent years.
Professor Henry G. Frankfurt at Princeton University distinguished between a liar and a bullshitter. A liar knows the truth and is trying to convince us of something different. A bullshitter either doesn't know the truth or doesn't care. Why do people like Nelson, Holland, and Cook, and they're only three of many, not choose the truth option, but rather project a narrative that they surely must know is false? And don't call me Shirley. There's a Chinese proverb that says 3 men make a tiger, and it refers to an individual's tendency to accept absurd information if it's repeated by enough people. Several other cultures express the same idea. A Czech proverb says, a lie repeated 1,000 times becomes a truth. It's the big lie. And Hitler's apostle, Joseph Goebbels, would have been proud of his Mormon counterparts. If you tell a lie often enough, it'll eventually be accepted as the truth. The answer to why the Mormon Church and its leaders will not tell the truth about the Church's lack of growth lies in their understanding of the law of conformity or social proof. This law refers to the psychological phenomenon where people reference the behaviors of others to guide their own actions. It recognizes that we're social animals. We like what other people like. We reject and discard what other people reject and discard. We tend to do what other people do. We follow the pack. Many people perceive behaviors as being more correct in a given situation to the degree that others view them as accurate. This law extends to what we wear, how fast we drive on the freeway, what we buy, and yes, even what religion we adhere to. Advertisers have been aware of and taken advantage of this law since the birth of media. They quickly learned that one of the most successful ways to sell a product to customers is to demonstrate that other people, just like themselves, like it and use it, whether it's a soft drink, a laundry detergent, a candy bar, or Viagra. If the boys and girls on Madison Avenue can show that other people, just like themselves, are purchasing the product, it becomes psychologically less risky to engage in the same consumer behavior. If you're over 40 years of age, you can no doubt remember when every McDonald's restaurant sign in the world displayed something that read 99 billion served. What was the message? If all those folks eat it, it must be good. To the leaders of the church, I ask, is allowing an article like this to remain on your official website in the spirit of the 13th article of faith? Is continuing to allow your apostles to deliver highly correlated talks, perpetuating the lie that the church is experiencing extraordinary growth, in keeping with the church's published definition of lying as any communication or falsehood or untruth for the purpose of deception? Don't the members of the church, as well as those honestly investigating the church, deserve better? I know I haven't pulled any punches here, but as critical thinkers, we have to look at the facts and think rationally and independently rather than simply take things at face value, or worse yet, accept them just because someone with a vested interest wants us to. While I do believe that most Mormons fail to apply critical thinking skills to their church, this is not meant to be an indictment of rank-and-file members. After all, they have been raised to believe that faith and emotion trumps rationality. Nor am I disputing that faith is important, but God gave us a mind so that we can come to know what's true and what's not. The British philosopher Austin Farrer noted that rational argument doesn't create belief, but it maintains a climate in which belief may flourish. We need to call bullshit when and where we see it, whether it's coming from a car salesman, a politician, or a Mormon church leader. To the leaders of the church, I'd suggest that it's time to change your false and untenable growth narrative. The fact that the LDS Church is experiencing subpar growth will not necessarily lead people to conclude that the church is not true. To the members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and to those investigating it, I would say don't take things at face value. Critical thinking is not a sin. The other form of the hypothetical syllogism is called modus tollens. Here's an example. Premise 1, if I'm a Mormon, then I wear garments. Premise 2, I don't wear garments. Conclusion, therefore, I'm not a Mormon. Again, the first two sentences, P1 and 2, are the premises of the argument, with the last sentence, C, being the conclusion. Providing clarification, below is a couple of examples containing a major premise, a minor premise, and the conclusion. All humans are mortal, major premise. Donald Trump is a human, minor premise. Therefore, Donald Trump is mortal, conclusion. Or, all men are Republican, major premise, false. Joe Biden is a man, minor premise, true. Therefore, Joe Biden is a Republican, conclusion, false. Identifying arguments in real life can be tricky at times. There's no easy normalized rules. We usually have to look at the context to determine which are the premises and which is the conclusion. However, the task can be a little easier by the presence of particular premise or conclusion indicators. For example, when someone makes a statement and then adds to it, "This is because," it's quite likely that the first statement offered was a conclusion, supported by the statements that come afterwards. The following words, which we call turnstiles, usually indicate that the premises will follow. Since, assuming that, firstly, secondly, as indicated by, for, as, after all, in view of the fact that, following from, it may be inferred, as shown, and conclusions are often preceded by words like therefore, ergo, it follows then that, hence, consequently, which proves, which demonstrates that, or this implies. Can you see any problem with this simple argument form? 1. A or B. 2. Not A. 3. Therefore B. In all reasoning, something is believed to follow from something else. But this, too, is not always the case. For example, if I marry a returned missionary, then I'll be happy. P2. I did not marry a returned missionary. Conclusion, therefore I'm not happy. In all reasoning, something is believed to follow from something else. But this, too, is not always the case. Arguments are either valid or invalid. An argument is valid if the conclusion would be true if the premises were true. If the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. It's impossible that all the premises are true and the conclusion is false. However, even if the premises are not true, the argument is said to be still valid if the conclusion would be true if the premises were true. This is important. Let me state it again. Even if the premises are not true, the argument is still valid if the conclusion would be true if the premises were true. An example of a valid argument is anyone who lives in Salt Lake City also lives in the state of Utah. Brigham does not live in Utah, therefore Brigham does not live in Salt Lake City. Another example, if Joseph Smith translated the Book of Mormon, then he was a prophet of God. Joseph Smith did translate the Book of Mormon, therefore Joseph Smith was a prophet of God. This argument is also valid. It doesn't matter if these two premises are true or false. If the conclusion would be true, if they were true, it is a valid argument. Remember, the key to judging if an argument is valid or invalid is not whether the premises are true or false. The question is, if the premises were true, would the conclusion be true? If the answer is yes, then the argument is valid. If the answer is no, then the argument is invalid. Don't confuse, though, validity with soundness. An argument is sound if and only if it's valid and contains true premises. Not all valid arguments are sound, that is, good, cogent, or well-founded. Example, if Russell Nelson meets with Jesus every Thursday, then I'm a monkey's uncle. Russell Nelson does meet with Jesus every Thursday, therefore I'm a monkey's uncle. This piece of reasoning is valid, but not very good, since part of what is being assumed is false. Russell Nelson meets with Jesus every Thursday. Good or well-founded reasoning is where Y is believed to follow from X, and where X is true. Let's examine an argument Fair Mormon made in response to a comment I'd made in my letter to an apostle. My comment was, is it not disconcerting that virtually every non-Mormon archaeologist, anthropologist, or linguist, and even some funded by the Mormon Church, declare that there's no evidence to support the Book of Mormon narrative? Fair Mormon's response, and you can read this on their website, was, why would a non-Mormon archaeologist, anthropologist, or linguist have any interest in searching for any evidence proving the Book of Mormon? It should be obvious that any archaeologist, anthropologist, or linguist interested in the subject would themselves be Mormon. Well, how about the logic? Let's write their response out in the form of an argument. Premise number 1, a non-Mormon archaeologist, anthropologist, or linguist would not have any interest in searching for the evidence proving the Book of Mormon. Premise number 2, any archaeologist, anthropologist, or linguist interested in the subject would themselves be Mormon. Their conclusion? Therefore, it should not be disconcerting that virtually every non-Mormon archaeologist, anthropologist, or linguist, and even some funded by the Mormon Church, declare that there is no evidence to support the Book of Mormon narrative. Well, how about the logic? Both premise 1 and premise 2 are erroneous. Premise number 1, why would a non-Mormon archaeologist, anthropologist, or linguist have any interest in searching for evidence proving the Book of Mormon? Archaeologists, anthropologists, or linguists need not be searching for evidence proving or disproving the Book of Mormon's authenticity. The fact is that their extensive research has not discovered any evidence consistent with or in any way supportive of the Book of Mormon narrative. Premise 2, it should be obvious that any archaeologist, anthropologist, or linguist interested in the subject would themselves be Mormon. By fair Mormon's reasoning, then, it should be obvious that any historian interested in the Third Reich, for example, must be a Nazi, or anyone studying serial killers must themselves be one. I'm trying hard not to be snarky here, but I can't help but wonder which genius at Fair Mormon penned this piece of brilliant apologetics. I can see why they don't put their name on their scribblings. Let's look at some other arguments that fail to be good. Argument 1. All politicians are liars. Justin Trudeau is a politician, therefore Justin Trudeau is a liar. The second example, all lions are mammals. My wife Rosemary is a mammal, therefore Rosemary is a lion. Obviously, both of these are bad arguments, but they're bad for different reasons. In the former argument, the problem is that the first premise is false. All politicians are liars. However, it's valid. Remember the rule, if the premises are not true, the argument is still valid if the conclusion would be true if the premises were true. So if all politicians are liars and Justin Trudeau is a politician, then it would follow that Justin Trudeau is a liar. In the second case, all lions are mammals. My wife Rosemary is a mammal, therefore Rosemary is a lion. In this case, even granting that all the premises are true, which they are, these premises do not give us a good reason to accept the conclusion. This argument has the opposite problem of the first one, Trudeau. In that case, the logic was sound, but one of the premises was false. All politicians are liars. In this statement, all the premises are true, but the logic is unsound. These are examples of two different ways of being bad and suggest a pair of conditions that a good argument must satisfy. One is the truth condition. If an argument is good, then all the premises must be true. Secondly, the logic condition. If an argument is good, then the conclusion must follow from the premises. Does this mean that any argument that satisfies both of these two conditions is good? Sadly, it does not. An argument can satisfy both conditions, but still fail to be good for other reasons. I'll give you an example. Capital punishment involves the taking of a person's life by the state as punishment for a crime. It is morally unjustified for the state to take the life of a person as punishment for a crime. Therefore, capital punishment is morally unjustified. Even if we grant that the conclusion follows from the premises, that is, it's valid, will this count as a good argument? No, it won't. The problem is the second premise. Here we have an example of an argument that satisfies both conditions, the truth condition and the logic condition, but still fails to be good by committing the begging the question fallacy. While we'll get into logical fallacies in the next episode, let me give you an illustration of begging the question. I'm confident that God exists because it says so in the Bible, and the Bible contains God's Word. Here the claim being made isn't necessarily incorrect. It's just that the argument doesn't support the claim, because it already assumes the claim is true. In this case, the speaker is asserting that God exists, but the proof being put forward already assumes that God exists in order to provide the content of the Bible. The term begging the question is a bit of a misnomer. It should have been translated as assuming the initial point or assuming the conclusion. Many people use it incorrectly when they're really wanting to say raising the question. Sometimes begging the question is fairly obvious. Other times it may be more subtle. For example, Avatar is the greatest movie ever made because it's the #1 top grossing movie of all time. Well, it's true that the movie Avatar brought in over $2.7 billion globally. However, it's not intrinsically true that the highest earning movie is inherently the best movie. The argument here again states that assumption, and as a result, it once again is restating the claim as proof for the proof. Here we have an illustration from the Joseph Smith story. And when you shall receive these things, I would exhort you that you would ask God the Eternal Father in the name of Christ if these things are not true. And if you shall ask with a sincere heart, with real intent, having faith in Christ, he will manifest the truth of it unto you by the power of the Holy Ghost. Well, this is problematic intellectually, philosophically, and biblically, but it also demonstrates the logical fallacy commonly known as begging the question. It's simply a form of circular reasoning. Moroni 10:4 is really asking us to assume that the Book of Mormon is true to find out if it is true. As well, one might argue that this sort of prayer test is fallacious, since there are some things we don't need to pray about. For example, successfully robbing a bank or committing adultery, for Scripture has already revealed the commands forbidding these things. Indeed, the Lord has repeatedly warned his followers about the dangers of being drawn into a false gospel. Paul tells us in Galatians 1:8, a scripture incidentally rarely quoted in the LDS Church, that even if an angel from heaven should preach to you a gospel contrary to that which we preach to you, he is to be accursed. Again, the begging the question fallacy happens when one assumes in their argument the conclusion they're seeking to establish. Syllogistic fallacies. Syllogisms often seem like very simple statements, but you may be surprised how often people make logical mistakes when they try to put together simple syllogisms. For example, some people who wear jeans are men. Some women are people who wear jeans, therefore some women are men. You can see the form is some A or B, some C or A, therefore some C or B. Well, obviously this is a bad argument. A Venn diagram here can show you why. Why is it bad? Because the subject and the predicate are not interchangeable in a syllogism. Let me give you an example of this from Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland. Then you should say what you mean, the March Hare went on. I do, Alice said hastily. At least I mean what I say. That's the same thing, you know. Not the same thing a bit, said the Hatter. Why, you might as well say, I see what I eat is the same as I eat what I see. You might as well just say, added the March Hare, that I like what I get is the same as I get what I like. You might just as well say, added the Dormouse, that I breathe when I sleep is the same thing as I sleep when I breathe. It's the same thing with you, said the Hatter. There is, of course, also the presupposition. It's valid, however, there can be a problem. You're probably too young to remember the popular jingle from ChargeX, the predecessor of Visa. Will that be cash or ChargeX? If it's not cash, then it has to obviously be ChargeX. This is a problem in formal logic that we call the false dilemma. The false dilemma, or as some call it, the false dichotomy, is a formal fallacy based on the either-or type of argument. Two choices are presented when more might exist. The claim is made that one is false and the other is true, or that one is acceptable and the other is not. Often there are other alternatives which haven't been considered. You either support Hillary Clinton for president or you don't believe in women's rights. George opposed an atheistic argument against Christianity, therefore he must be Christian. Is that the only option we have, water or soda? Can I not vote for another candidate and still believe in women's rights? In the Mormon Church, we're taught from an early age that emotion tells us if we're making right or wrong choices. COVID-19. Either we shelter in place, strictly observe social distancing, and wear masks on those rare occasions when we venture out, or we reopen our businesses and start to resume normal life. Choose the right. You know the song. If you went to primary, you heard it over and over and over again. Lyrics combined with powerful music, repeating this simple message. There's a right and a wrong to every question. If you went to primary, you learned that decisions in life are right or wrong, period. You've been taught these things. Choosing the right is good and approved of God. Not choosing the right is bad and leads to God's Spirit being withdrawn. And because God can't look upon sin with the least degree of allowance, any sin that you don't repent of impacts your eternal salvation, including your ability to be forever with your family. Those stakes are pretty high. This choose the right thinking often leads to withdrawal, indecision, and inaction. And even in the Mormon paradigm, choosing the right isn't as easy as it sounds. God doesn't give commandments for everything, D&C 58. Even in the basic commandments, he may change his mind, like when he told Nephi to cut off Laban's head. But beware, Satan is also trying to tempt and deceive you. So you've got to figure out Satan as well. At least there's the Holy Ghost to guide you, right? But unfortunately, this approach brings you to the unanswerable question, was that thought a prompting from the Spirit, or was it just my own brain? Well, if you still can't decide what to do, you can simply follow the prophet. He speaks for God. Well, except, of course, when he's speaking as a man. How do you escape this choose the right or false dilemma thinking? Well, the work that we've done in the last few decades on emotional intelligence can help. When you find yourself paralyzed by a choice, you might want to try this. Notice your feelings. If you're feeling uncomfortable, allow that discomfort. If you grew up Mormon, you were repeatedly taught that you should always have the Spirit with you. You probably learned to view uncomfortable feelings as signs that something is wrong and learn to resist them. As human beings, we're designed to feel a wide range of emotions. All emotions in our body come from our thoughts or interpretations of those thoughts. Emotions themselves are never a problem. They exist to teach us, to aid in our survival, and they provide energy for action. Think of each thought as an object. If you're thinking the same thoughts over and over again, you're simply witnessing your brain acting efficiently. Thoughts that we think over and over again seem so real. However, they're just thoughts. Either Joseph Smith was a prophet of God or the greatest of deceivers. All of the brethren have ridden this horse at one time or another. President Joseph Fielding Smith, who was president of the LDS Church in the early 1970s, stated Mormonism must stand or fall on the story of Joseph Smith. He was either a prophet of God, divinely called, properly anointed, and commissioned, or he was one of the biggest frauds this world has ever seen. There's no middle ground. If Joseph was a deceiver who willfully attempted to mislead people, then he should be exposed. His claims should be refuted, and his doctrine should be shown as false. Jeffrey R. Holland said in an article entitled True or False in the New Era, accept Joseph Smith as a prophet and the book as the miraculously revealed and revered word of the Lord it is, or else consign both man and the book to Hades for the devastating deception of it all. But let's not have any bizarre middle ground about the wonderful contours of a young boy's imagination or his remarkable facility for turning a literary phrase. That is an unacceptable position to take morally, literally, historically, or theologically. Elder Orson Pratt said way back in 1851, this book must either be true or false. If true, it's one of the most important messages ever sent from God. If false, it's one of the most cunning, wicked, bold, deep-laid impositions ever palmed upon the world, calculated to deceive and to ruin millions. And, of course, we have President Ezra Taft Benson saying the Book of Mormon is the keystone of our testimony. Just as the ark crumbles if the keystone is removed, so does all the church stand or fall with the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon. The validity of conclusions are not always easy to see. Look at this argument. All laws are just, all rules are just, therefore all rules are laws. What do you think? Sometimes drawing a simple Venn diagram can help. Well, what does this diagram show? It would appear to show that conclusion A is valid, since rules is a subset of laws, which is a subset of just. But not so fast, Kemosabe. This also could be an accurate representation of the conclusion. Therefore, can we say conclusively that all rules are laws? No, we can't. How about this one? No rules are laws. Well, again, look at our Venn diagram. This would appear to be the case, right? I mean, there's no overlap here between the two subsets of laws and rules, and they both fall within the universe of just. However, here again, we see that this is not necessarily the case. This overlap would still fit the rules. Therefore, conclusion B is also invalid. How about conclusion C? Some rules are laws. Okay, let's draw another Venn diagram. Some rules are laws. Yes, there's an overlap there. Some rules obviously are laws, and they both fall within, again, the universe just. But this could also be an accurate representation of situation or conclusion C. Well, then how about conclusion D? Some rules are not laws. Well, here we go. Yes, some rules are not laws here. Again, both falling in. Having looked at 4 different conclusions, what can we conclude? We can conclude that there's no valid conclusion, that neither of the 4 is valid. We can't really say definitively that one of these is correct. But just as we had an invalid conditional argument form in the case of the modus ponens, which we called affirming the consequence, there's another invalid conditional argument form, which is the invalid version of the modus tollens. Denying the antecedent, the argument is, if A is true, then B is true. A is not true, therefore B is not true. Here's an example of it. If you believe in God, you're a good person. You don't believe in God, therefore you're not a good person. Another example, if you're a bishop, you'll have a testimony. You don't have a testimony, consequently, you're not a bishop. It's not too hard to see why this argument is bad. You may not have a testimony, but still be a bishop. Have you ever heard this one? If you're LDS, then you'll have a bright countenance. You're not LDS, therefore you don't have a bright countenance.
Look at the people who believe. Look at the people who don't believe. And notice that you see a difference in their lives. You see a difference in their countenances. You see a difference in their attitudes. And so when I look around me, I say, am I a fool to believe? No, not when I see my life and the joy in my life compared to the drama in the lives of others who are struggling in their testimonies.
One person's modus ponens is another person's modus tollens. If God is just and loving, then he won't kill innocent people. But then we're faced with the story of God ordering the killing of people in the Old Testament. There are a couple of ways to resolve this. The atheist uses modus tollens. Those people were innocent, therefore God must not be just and loving. Many theists will go the other way and use modus ponens. God is just and loving, therefore those people must not have been innocent. If the church is of God, it will teach correct doctrines about topic X. Its doctrines about topic X are correct, therefore the church is of God. Try replacing X with any of the church's past or present doctrines. For example, blacks being the seed of Cain and an inferior race, homosexuality being a sin, God having once been a man, the suggestion that we can all become gods. Polygamy is essential. It's acceptable to lie for the Lord, blood atonement, the Adam-God theory. The law of the excluded middle, espoused by Bertrand Russell, states that if A is B is false, then A is not B must be true. An example is President Dallin Oak's Orwellian mantra that not everything that is true is useful. If we accepted Oak's statement in the affirmative that A, not everything that is true is B, useful, then the negative corollary, not everything that is false is not useful, must also be true. But perhaps Oakes really does believe that. Evidence his statement to a reporter that he knew nothing about Boyd Packard's involvement in Paul Toscano's excommunication. When, however, to his chagrin, Pulitzer Prize-winning cartoonist Steve Benson, who knew better, expressed his disappointment that Oakes twisted the truth, Oakes had contacted the reporter and asked that his statement indicating that he had no knowledge of Packard's involvement in the excommunication be eradicated. There are many examples in the Mormon experience where things that are known to be wholly untrue are nonetheless very useful. Joseph Smith's denials of his illegal polygamous and polyandrous marriages, and the lies he told the saints, and even his wife. False statements, certainly, but they were useful to him and his agenda. Look at the many paintings hanging in Mormon chapels, visitor centers, and temples around the globe, and pictures still being reproduced in LDS church books and manuals showing a young, strong-chinned Joseph Smith studiously examining the reformed Egyptian characters on the golden plates, while his faithful scribe sat across from him, writing down his translation. A much more inspiring image than reality. Well, this concludes today's edition of Critical Thinking for Mormons. This is Paul Douglas wishing you all the best until we see you next time.